I watched hundreds of successful researchers use the Infranodus AI and realized something that all of them have in common. This approach that I'm going to share with you helps them generate better ideas and more original insights. And it's not just about writing better prompts in a chat interface. Instead, they represent the information they work with as a knowledge graph where they can see the main topics, concepts, and relations between them. And then they use them as entry points into the discourse to get original and interesting perspectives. Moreover, such representation allows them to see the content gaps of the topics that are not well connected, and then they can use these gaps to generate original insights that bridge those ideas in new and interesting ways. And let me show you why it actually works better than using a standard chat interface. So when you're using a chat, you're locked into this linear representation that text has. It takes very long to read it, and it's very hard to extract insights from it. It takes a lot of time and effort. Instead, when you represent information as a graph, you can very quickly jump to the parts that are relevant and interesting for you. For example, I can zoom in onto a specific topic I'm interested in and then find the concepts that I'm curious about, and then I can explore them in more detail, but then I can use the selection to steer my AI to provide an interesting idea that would connect these concepts in an interesting way. So we're very good at pattern recognition, so when we see a graph, we can directly identify the parts of the discourse that could be interesting for us and relevant to our research, and then we can focus on them and use the AI or our own thinking to develop them further. So all these researchers who use a knowledge graph don't ask the AI to do the job for them, but rather they work together with AI and steer its reasoning process in the direction that they're interested in. The graph is like a compass, and then they use this compass to navigate through ideas and knowledge. Let me show you how this works. For example, here I have a result of a deep research mode. This text is based on the topic of how you can generate bliss using external sensory stimuli. I was running this research for a friend, and I want to see how I can contribute in an interesting way to this whole discourse. So what ChatGPT did very well is to provide a summary of the research in this subject, and then, the normal approach would be to read it through and then start asking questions. Instead, I simply copied the contents of this file, and then I go into Infranodus and then paste this text into Infranodus in order to represent it as a knowledge graph. After the graph is generated, I remove some concepts that are not relevant to my research, some auxiliary words like site, and then I can see the visualization of what this deep research report is about. Then I can turn on the topical cluster, so I can see what are the main topics inside this text, and I can see that it's about affective touch, vibrotactile patterns, then valence arousal, and haptic response. So for example, if I'm studying this subject directly, I know that, okay, I'm interested in haptic response. So I can select this topic and then go to the AI module and ask it to generate a summary of this particular cluster for me so that I understand what it's talking about and that I get an entrance into this text from the perspective of haptic response. And here it's giving me the exact information I need, the frequencies I need to be using to provide the sense of bliss, and the other types of sensory input that can generate this sort of response. So it's very quick, and I could jump directly to the part that I'm interested in this text. Compared to if I was just reading this through and trying to find this part, I would not even know that it exists there. So I would have to read it first and then maybe notice it and then, talk to ChatGPT and ask it to generate the insight like this. Here I can just do it directly. It's very useful. So most of the researchers will actually first look at the graph and go through all these different topics one by one and explore them from different perspectives, zooming into the parts that they find relevant and interesting here. And then they will either, filter the statements by the topic and read through them manually, or use the built-in AI to generate a summary, or you also have other modes like a fact or an interesting idea, or even a research question that could help you develop this topic further. Then another pattern that I see a lot of people use is that they go to identify the structural gaps, or the content gaps as we call them here. These are the topics that could be better connected in this discourse but are not yet, so then you can simply reiterate through them and find some combinations that you find interesting. For instance, here there's a slight gap between affective touch and vibrotactile patterns. So I can select this gap and then I can ask the Infranodus AI to generate an interesting research question that would bridge those two topics together. And that is a very good way to start thinking about this whole subject matter from an original perspective, because you're touching upon the topics that are relevant in this graph. So here, affective touch and vibrotactile patterns, but they're maybe not so well connected yet. So you will actually contribute in an interesting way to this discourse by making this connection. And once Infranodus generates an interesting question for you, if you like what you see, you can save it into your project notes. So it's going to be saved in this graph here. And each time you open the graph, you can come back to these insights. And you can actually do it with any other generated response. So for example, if you like this first summary of the topic on haptic response here that we had, you can also save it into project notes, and it's going to be added here. And then you can work with it later in your research. So it's like you're picking the fruits from the tree of knowledge and then saving them into your collection so that you can come back to it after. What I see even more advanced users do is that they will try to cut off the top layer of concepts that seem too obvious to them. So for example, if you know this topic already, you could select, let's say, touch and affective and vibrotactile, all these words, and then you remove them from the graph, and then it recalculates the main topical cluster, so you get more nuanced representation of deeper, more latent topics that exist in this text. And then you can reiterate the approach that I just shown you. So for example, here we have a new topic on emotional threshold. So if before we were talking about the kind of impulse that you need to generate bliss, now we're also talking about the threshold that these impulses should have. And maybe we wouldn't see this topic otherwise hidden underneath all these surface ones. So this is why it's very good to cut off the top layer, and this is what a lot of people do. They cut off the top layer to get to the deeper concepts and topics, and then they explore them in the same way. And then once they explore them, then you can go into the content gaps and then also reiterate through the gaps, and maybe you find some new interesting ideas based on these more latent topics. One other very interesting mode that you can use is the Transcend mode. So that's when you select a certain topic, for example here, tactile control, and then you tell Infranodus to transcend the discourse. And what's going to happen is that it's going to identify, okay, you're kind of maybe stuck a little bit in this thought bubble. So it's going to try to come up with an idea that would connect this cluster to the outside world. And this is why this graph representation is so helpful, because it shows you not only what's there, but also indicates what's not there. And then you can use the AI to help you think beyond the periphery of this knowledge that you already have. So it's a really interesting approach, and I also recommend you to use this mode. The best thing is that you can also do all that inside your favorite LLM. So for example, I can copy this graph that was generated by Infranodus and then go inside ChatGPT, connect the Infranodus MCP server, and then ask it generate content gaps from this graph, Infranodus graph. And then once I say this, it's going to run the Infranodus tool, access this graph, and then run a specific command that will extract the content gaps from there and then provide the response to me, which it will then integrate into this conversation. So then what's good is that you can actually then use ChatGPT to interact with those structural insights that you get from the knowledge graph. So it's quite good for those who, for example, don't understand how to use the interface, or who don't want to bother with the graphical interface. Then you can just save the graph and then go back to ChatGPT and use the Infranodus MCP server in order to interact with it and in order to generate the same insights. Okay, so I hope you find this demonstration useful. I created it based on my observations of how people actually use Infranodus and knowledge graphs. So I thought I will summarize the most interesting workflows and show them to all of you so that you can apply them in your own project. Thank you.